Welcome to our show today. I am the producer-host, Janice Thompson. This is a SAC production, and we're all here today to honor the life and legacy of Doris Aiken, who passed March 15th of this year, 2017. And there are several guests here today around this table who will have commentary on Doris. And stay tuned because it's really interesting and what she's accomplished in her life, particularly since she started RID. I want to mention first off about her book that was published in 2002, and her daughter Jane edited it. It's a lovely picture of Doris, and she was also associated with SAC as well. She did many shows in its inception in the 1970s. And we're also going to talk about further, but I'll mention an event at Ellis Hospital on the 25th of September. That's a Monday, where a plaque will be dedicated in her memory. So you are either watching this today on Channel 16, or you are watching it on the internet, because this show does go all over the world. So I'm going to get started with William. I wanted to introduce all my guests, starting with William. William is the son of Doris, and he's also the vice president of RID, which stands for Remove Intoxicated Drivers. Next to William is Lillian Stern, a longtime friend, and also continues to be a board member. Right, Lillian? Mm-hmm. She's also mentioned in this book as well. And Denise Cashmere, and she was, and I have to read it, she was, or is, the retired former Schenectady County Stop DWI Traffic Safety Coordinator. And next to her is Jess Petraquin.
Yes.
A longtime friend and a friend of Doris's as well as the family. And Michael Sieber is on the end, and he's the assistant police chief of Schenectady County for a long time. And next to him on his right is Betty Martin, a victim of DWI. So we're going to talk with everyone, and I wanted to start with William to talk a little bit first about the event at Ellis Hospital.
Okay, well, Doris started the safety tree in 2008 as a way of honoring people who lost their lives to drunk drivers in Schenectady County. We had a ceremony last spring where a mother, grandmother, and daughter were killed by a drunk driver in Duanesburg, and the safety tree has white lights, and if there's a death, they're replaced by a red light. So we have 3 red lights paying tribute to that family of 3 that lost their lives to a drunk driver. On this event, we're going to be screwing in a green light representing Doris's contribution to that, as there's a green light in the safety tree down in Hudson, New York. So she came up with this idea, and it's been replicated in Hudson and other states as well as the same.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I knew that it was only, I thought it was only here in Schenectady.
No, it's also in Hudson.
Very nice.
And she also as part of the plaque is honoring her as the person who started the whole drunk driving movement back in 1978. So we're inviting the Mayor McCarthy, the District Attorney Carney, a representative from the governor's office, because she also had worked with him. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a good moment also to remind people the importance of driving sober and how you can't turn the clock back once you get behind the wheel and kill someone. So I think it's
right.
something that she certainly, I feel, did not get the accolades that were her while she was alive, and now that she's passed, this is an event that will do that.
Right, and that's often the case, though, isn't it, with others?
Yes.
And it was the Morris family, correct, that impacted her initially?
Yeah, back in December of 1977.
Yes.
When they knew her because the Morris children had appeared on her TV show for Channel 6.
Oh.
And so Mrs. Bonnie Morris contacted her to call the district attorney, and the district attorney told her to mind her own business.
Yes.
And that's how she got the introduction to this problem. She had a first-hand emotional impact that really lit a fire in her to make change.
Yes, and that really propelled her forward, didn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Before we move on with accomplishments, I want to mention a little bit about pre-RID with Doris. She was born in Souderton, Pennsylvania in 1926. Her parents were divorced in 1940. They had worked for ball bearing manufacturing.
She did. During the war.
Okay, during the wartime.
Yeah.
And then she moved to Los Angeles, and I know from the book that she had a friend that invited her out there, and she ended up staying there. And she finished her degree at UCLA, and it was not in a field that...
It was sociology.
Sociology. She also did something in the music field, too.
Well, she was thinking of being a music major, and then she sat in on a tea where they were playing Bach without any sheet music, and she sort of slept out the back door.
She got discouraged.
Yeah.
She said, I'll never be able to do that. That's what she said. Anyway, she probably could have. And then she got married in 1956 to William Aiken, your father, and that was in Santa Monica. And 2 children were born there.
All 3 of us were
children.
Born in
Jane
Los
in 1957, you in 1960, and Mary Gail in 1963. And her first job out there in Los Angeles.
No, that was in Houston.
Oh, this is in Houston.
Yeah,
I'm
Houston,
sorry.
Texas.
I see now. Her first job was in Houston, Texas.
Her first job as a social activist.
Working with poor minorities.
Yes.
In
with
Houston.
Barbara Jordan.
Oh, with Barbara Jordan. Yeah, I didn't remember reading that in the book, but it may have been in there. And she also worked for Save the Children in Westport, Connecticut. And then she ran for the New York State Assembly, 107th District, as a Democratic challenger, and got interested in politics, of course. And then in 1977, she became a talk show host for NBC Channel 6.
Yeah, she started with SAC, and that's what was her training ground to leading up to that job.
So first she was with SAC, and the name of her show with SAC was Aiken's Alley. And then the opinion show came much later.
Yeah, 30
much
years
later. Okay. So in 1978, she founded RID, and so we'll pick it up from there, and we'll talk a little bit with everyone. And she made some appearances on television shows, which we're going to show some clips as well. I wanted to ask you, Lillian, about your relationship with Doris and the impact that she had on you.
Well, I first became aware of Doris Aiken because she had just begun RID through the Unitarian Society. And at that time I was teaching, and one of the little girls in my class had a father who was hurt very badly in a drunk driving accident, and nothing happened to the guy who did it. So when I heard about Doris and began to know her a little bit, I decided to become a member of RID. So that was really kind of in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then we became very good friends. We did things together.
Did you go to court with her too when she made appearances there?
Yes.
On occasion?
Yes, on occasion we did do that.
Yeah.
So that was, and I knew her for the rest of the time.
Sure.
And I really, enjoyed her friendship much more so than I did any other friend I had.
Oh,
I thought she
that's
was very unusual.
That's very nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to associate with honest people, and she sacrificed a lot, didn't she, to get this up and running and
really
make an
did.
impact in our society.
She was really very unusual.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody else will agree to that.
And you're also in this book, which I'll show again, which I hope people will maybe want to purchase it. It is at Barnes & Noble. It's on Amazon.
No, it's on Amazon, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Barnes & Noble has it as well.
Oh.
But it's worthy of reading because it shows you what you go through if you want to achieve something that means a lot to you. It just doesn't happen. So Denise, hi.
Hello.
Yep, and you can say what you were in your former life again.
I was the Schenectady County Stop DWI coordinator, the first one. I was appointed right after the new laws came into New York State, and one of the requirements for the laws is that each county have a Stop DWI program. And I can quickly tell you, we talked earlier about how the laws changed.
Yeah.
Before 1980, was the end of 1981, there was a lot of plea bargaining going on. People pled out of alcohol charges. And this what kind of infuriated Doris, when you find out someone's arrested for drinking and driving and they weren't necessarily convicted of some level of drinking and driving.
Right, they would get off on something unrelated to it.
Totally.
Yeah.
The other thing, it created minimum mandatory fines, which is important for the next step, which is it created Stop DWI programs across New York State. Every county could keep their fine money if they established a Stop DWI program. So it was all self-sufficient, run on fine money. So I was appointed Stop DWI coordinator. The first task is to put together a steering committee. And in Schenectady County, we already had a citizen activist. And I'll have to say, as a young 29-year-old putting this committee together, Doris's reputation preceded her. And I was a little afraid of her. And we put together a committee. The committee consisted of all the local police chiefs, judges, someone from education. We had it all well-rounded, someone from treatment. And Doris came to the first few meetings, and my first memory is, Doris would say what was on her mind. And we would talk about what the law was and what's going on, and she'd stop and say, well, that doesn't happen, this such and such, or that doesn't happen in this court. And she would challenge them to make sure they were following the law, especially our district attorney at that time. We were really fighting to get a policy established. And as the years went on, I realized she sometimes would upset people at meetings, and I'd call her and say, Doris, she go, well, you have to do this, Denise, and I'd say, well, I can't do that. I work for government. And she goes, but I can. And she said, that's how we'll be partners. And she was an amazing partner for the next 30 years because she didn't have restraints on her. And as you learn from her book, sometimes she was actually, quote, punished somewhat financially because of the way she did speak out. And she held people accountable. And I ended up having one of the best programs in the state in Schenectady County, and she was a big part of it.
Now, did this organization with the county precede your relationship with Doris, or?
No, it all began at the same time.
At the same time.
Because my task was to put together a local steering committee, and that's what we did. And the other part, which I know we'll discuss more, is we began the victim impact panels, which others can talk about a little more. But
Certainly.
Doris and her husband Bill ran the victim impact panels in Schenectady County for many years. And again, she was invaluable to do that.
Yeah, and there wasn't anything like that before she started RID, right?
No, they were just beginning in the
Just
early
beginning.
80s, and they started picking up in other states and in other areas. But
Yeah.
many counties in New York started doing them, and Doris was instrumental in that also.
Right. That was one of her big accomplishments.
Yes.
And now, do they have them all over the country?
Yes, they do. And
They
I
do.
mean, not every state and every county, but I know in New York State, they either offer it through the county at the county level, or there's a couple smaller counties that do them together.
Yeah.
So yes, and they're usually in many counties a mandatory part of sentencing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how much that helped the Morrises way back when she started RID,
No,
because
well,
they really
they
got
didn't-
off
yeah.
with
That was
case-
pre.
a $500 fine, and like
6 months
they
in
were
jail.
supposed to have paid the family. There were
Some restitution
The
and-
two children that died, they were supposed to pay the family like $80,000, and he went to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And
That was all
never could
pre-Stop
reclaim any
DWI
money.
legislation and the new laws in New York State.
yeah. So a lot of changes. I mean, I'm sure we're not where we need to be, but it's a journey, isn't it? Yeah. Well, thank you. We'll be talking more.
My turn?
Your turn, Jess.
Yes. Working at the Wedgeway Barber Shop back in the mid-90s, I did not know the Aiken family until I came across William as a customer, and he became my regular haircut customer. And,
Oh, well, that was
and,
nice.
So over time, we became friends, and then, he gradually told me, who his mother was, and
Yes.
How it was the RID organization that kind of fought for justice for victims of DWI and such.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, even my own mom had been to one of her talks at some point long before my parents moved out of this area. Probably going back about 12 years ago. But after I opened up my own barber shop on Van Branken Avenue, it wasn't long after that I started getting invited to a lot of parties and gatherings and functions over at the Aiken house.
Yes.
And lots of the conversation was always political. And it did have to do with RID, but I was kind of like the only one that wasn't very familiar with the whole RID thing.
Yeah.
But what I do remember was 5 years ago, I had a family member living with me temporarily that had a serious alcohol problem. And she was up all night, tripping over things, falling down the stairs, and probably going out for drives when she wasn't supposed to. And Doris at that time told me about a anonymous way of reporting somebody that was out, driving drunk when they weren't supposed to. And we were talking about this on the way over. Perhaps you could help me a little bit with that, William?
Yeah, that was with AT&T had a number where you could call, and then they would get the information from the person making the call, and I think it was 888 Stop DWI.
Sure.
But it was something that we utilized quite a bit with people calling on how they could deal with this problem, and that unfortunately it's no longer in use, but. It was something it was a very useful resource for us to.
Yeah. Now, is there something?
I never
current?
ended up having to use it.
Yeah.
No, there is nothing.
There's nothing current.
The individual moved out of my house, thank God. And But another thing I wanted to cover was I think one of the first times I was ever over at the Aiken house, and I'm a camera buff, and I was always shooting video and stuff, and I had the camera on Doris for the first time, and I do have this footage, and I will dig it up sometime, and she was in the foyer entrance of her house there, and always looked like a beautiful castle inside there. And at one point she looks at the camera and she would say, "Am I on camera?" And I'd say yes, and she goes, "Well, turn off the camera," and she would chuckle. And it was so she always had a great sense of humor,
Well, that's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where the RID headquarters were, out of the home, and currently still,
Yes.
right, William?
Yes.
What is the address of RID?
The P.O. Box is...
It's a P.O. box,
yes,
right?
P.O. Box 520, Schenectady. Oh, it's P.O. Box 520, Schenectady, New York, 12301.
Okay, if people want to contact you or the organization,
Yes, we can put
Well,
the
it'll be
P.O.
on
Box on the
screen.
credits, at the end of the credits.
we'll have it on screen. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting, and I think she liked to be intellectually challenged. So when you talk about the political conversations, I'm not surprised.
We always had good times and good laughs, and I went to a lot of dinners with William and his mom, and movies and such. And,
Yes.
she was always just fantastic company. And,
Isn't that lovely? We have a lot of wonderful, cherished memories, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I said, I produce a freelance news show on Channel 16, the Open Stage Media, called JP News. It's on 3 times a week. And I have, over the years, there's been a lot of her birthday parties and stuff at her house, and I have yet to dig up that footage, so please stay tuned.
Well, you will,
Okay.
Betty. We talked on the phone, but we didn't meet until today.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's good to be here, and I want to thank Bill for inviting me to come today, because Doris was a powerful force in my life. Really changed the direction of my life. I met Doris in 1982 during the trial for my daughter Michelle, who was killed by a multiple offender drunk driver. And
you are also in this book.
Well,
Yes.
I guess Doris and I had a lot of adventures
in
together.
The book, so
So
yes.
at that time, which was probably the most shattered, devastating low point in my life and the life of my family, Doris was a voice that inspired and helped me to pick up the pieces and make some sense out of all the craziness that was going on. I remember, I think Lillian was there too in the courtroom. They were doing court watching during Michelle's trial, and Doris says to me, "Why don't you write a letter to Judge Harris?" And I said, "I can't do that." And her usual answer, "Of course you can."
I think your letter's in the book.
And she said, "Just sit down and write what's on your mind." She said, there'll be all kinds of letters for the offender, and someone should hear from Michelle. And when she said that, it really brought to me, it's the state of New York against the defendant, but the humanness of the loss when a DWI crash occurs with death or injury can be depersonalized in a court of law. And I remember talking to Dan Dwyer and telling him this, and he said to me, "Betty, I will bring Michelle to the courtroom." And he did. And he brought her as a human being, as a daughter, as a sister, a friend, all those things. And so I did sit down and write the letter that Doris recommended. having no understanding whatsoever that it was the first time a victim impact statement had ever been written and read into the court record in New York State.
Wow.
And then Dan Dwyer, picking up that gauntlet, sought and obtained the first manslaughter conviction for a DWI offense in New York State. So it was always Doris telling me, yes, you can, and always me saying, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I remember the 21 minimum purchase age when that was, going on, being debated in the legislature. I was teaching school at that time, and Doris said, you have to come down the Capitol. We're going to put the scroll down, and all the legislators, if they want to get out of the chambers, they're going to have to walk over it. I said, I can't do that. Well, of course you can. So we're there, and one of the security people said we had to leave. And Doris said, oh, no, we're not leaving. And he was very strict about it. He said, well, then I will have to forcefully have you leave. And I said, oh, Doris. And she says, don't worry, Betty. She said, when they come to arrest us, just put your hands out and let them put on the cuffs. Don't fight. And I thought, oh, my God, all my kids in school are going to see me being handcuffed on TV and let out of the state legislative building. Doris encouraged me to speak to people in government, in the community, that I never would have been able to see myself. So she really inspired me to do things.
Get out of your comfort zone, certainly.
Way out.
Way out.
And then to take all the things that we did together and bring them to other people. So she really facilitated me coming from being a shattered victim,
Certainly.
survivor, to being an activist.
Yes.
And making sure that the voices of victims were heard. And I think that was one of our first crime victims things, was Silent No More. And it was Doris who encouraged not only myself, but so many DWI victims to speak up instead of just accepting what was the norm at that time.
Now,
So
what was the year of that?
Michelle was killed in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know that Stop DWI was in its infancy, RID was in its infancy. So I went on to really grow to love and respect a woman that I thought was a role model. She stood for what she believed in, and regardless of what obstacles were put in her path, she knew the right way, and that was going to be what it was. And that's what Denise said about she could do it on that side. And
Certainly.
that's what she taught me. And for the past 37 years, until Doris's death, we've worked together and hopefully have made a difference in this world.
Well, I'm sure it has. And you have really fond memories of her. She really changed your life, impacted your life.
Absolutely.
Well, it's nice to see you smiling.
Wouldn't have thought that when I first met Doris. I didn't think that smiles would ever come again.
Certainly.
But she was able to pick up all the pieces and help me put them together with a little Scotch tape and glue.
Isn't that lovely? That's
So-
such a lovely tribute
And
to
to
her.
find out by in serving others, it really strengthens.
Certainly.
And I think that's what many DWI victims and other crime victims will tell you, that once you give them a voice, once you empower them,
Yes.
it helps in the healing.
Well, I'm glad you've come a long way, I'm sure. It's had to have been a very difficult time for you. And I wasn't sure, did the accident take place right around here?
The crash occurred on Route 85 in Delmar, right outside of Ohav Shalom. And to tell you about the pervasiveness of DWI at the time, when the crash occurred, the offender had crossed and was going the wrong way on a 4-lane divided highway outside of Ohav Shalom, and he hit Michelle head on. But there was a young couple in the parking lot enjoying each other's company. And this young man jumped over the fence, and he was the one who was there to hold Michelle's hand as she spoke her last words. And at trial, he testified and was a very, very powerful witness to what he had seen. But 2 years later, in the town of Colony, coming off the Northway, driving drunk, he killed another woman.
Oh my golly.
So the question, the thing is, everyone but thee and me. People don't understand that it's really all of us. And it isn't that it's an accidental thing. It's a deliberate act. People know that when they're going to drink alcohol, and I think this is what Doris tried to express to everyone.
But he went to prison, didn't he, for your daughter's death? Didn't he get it?
The man who killed my daughter went to prison, yes.
And then when he got out, he...
No.
Oh.
The person who assisted my daughter after the crash.
Oh, I see, okay.
He was there. He saw the whole thing. He saw the devastation of Michelle being crushed in that car, and testified in court, and then still went out and drove drunk and killed someone else.
Oh my goodness! The one that helped your daughter.
The one who assisted my daughter at this crash,
that's bizarre.
and who testified at her trial,
That is so bizarre.
killed another woman driving drunk.
And what happened to him, Betty?
I believe he got, which was the normal sentence at that time, which is 1 1/3 to 3 years, which means that they spent like 6 months in a county jail.
How long after?
2 years.
2 years.
2 years after you come
Right.
to your daughter, he gets drunk and he.
And he killed someone else.
What's the rhyme or reason? That is just
well, getting the message out, which is what
Unfathomable.
Doris fought for so valiantly and so long and so hard. Yeah, and she was, you couldn't defeat her. She just had the energy, and it inspired everyone else to rise to her standard. And that's the way I felt about Doris.
Well, what a powerful message you brought today. If anything, if we can save one life because people are viewing this, certainly we would want to save more. But it certainly will be worthwhile for our viewers because drunken driving is a pervasive disease in our society, even though we've made strides. Could you pass the mic to Mike? The mic to Mike. Michael Sieber.
Yep. That's quite the story to follow. So
it is quite a story to follow.
A lot of twist I didn't see coming, but that's my heart goes out to you. So I'll say as law enforcement. My story's a little different with Doris, and what I mean by that is I was a young sergeant back in the early 90s. If I had to guess, I'd say 93, 94, when I had the opportunity to meet her first time. And I got to, over the years after that, meet her a little bit more as I rose in the ranks and deal with RID and some of the other organizations out there. But I remember being a young sergeant, and Doris, I think my lieutenant or chief came to me and said, put Doris ride with you tonight. And somebody said before, reputation preceded her. So as a young sergeant, I wasn't sure what to expect and who was going to get into the car and sit there with me for, well, it was supposed to be a couple hours. I remember the first ride in particular because, again, it was supposed to be a couple hours, and I wasn't sure what kind of conversations we're going to have, what kind of calls we're going to go on, what we'd see and not see. Obviously, in Schenectady is a very busy city, but she was there, I think, more from a DWI component to see how the police, operate and so forth. I wasn't totally sure what to expect, and all I can remember is the conversation, and the night flew by. So she kind of came and I'm not going to say let her guard down, but she made me very comfortable, and I just had pre notions of maybe this is someone that's anti-police in a way that we're not doing things powerful enough. We're not doing. Well, wasn't that at all. She was very understanding.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah, she had. So we had a nice rapport. I was telling some of these guys before that I remember she's supposed to be 2 hours, and she probably stayed 6 that night. And I actually dropped her off at her house when we were all done. We had the conversation, continued right to there. She, 2 more times after that, I remember her riding with me over a course of probably 6-9 months. She came back.
Was that what she wanted to do? She wanted to actually be on a ride?
Yeah, I don't know I'm not sure if this is the first time that she had ridden with law enforcement or not.
Yeah.
I don't remember. And I wasn't sure what her basis of why she wanted to do it.
Yeah.
I think she wanted to go out there and see what the reality was of enforcement.
She wanted to have more insight.
Yes,
I'm sure.
And what we see, how we handle DWIs, how we patrol them.
Yeah.
Denise had mentioned some of the revenues that come through. I wasn't there I came on in 1989, and so I'm talking about 93, 94, 95. And those revenues to this day come back and they allow law enforcement to be proactive in DWI patrols, and that we normally couldn't be. In other words, we're very responsive. That we get called and we have to respond somewhere, and it takes up a lot of our time. Where we have funding through these different programs, Stop DWI in particular, that we can be proactive. We can send officers out in the street just to look for DWIs, just to do the traffic enforcement, just to certain areas to enforce it stricter. And I think that's where her impact is life lasting, and it just keeps on going because it keep on giving back. Because without those things that happened in the 80s, and I didn't go back as far as the 70s, that if they didn't happen originally, then we may not be here where we are today. I also want to say in Schenectady County, in Schenectady City in particular, we have always been proactive, at least since I've been on the job with DWI enforcement, and I think our numbers, and maybe Denise will back me up a little bit on this, we always had very good numbers. And I'm not saying that there was more of a drinking problem in Schenectady, but I think we took a proactive approach to it. And Doris came. She had a factor in that because through the DA's office and through the police department and whatever channels she could take, she influenced some people's decisions and made us more proactive as a police department. So,
now, was she instrumental in having an impact on the sobriety safety checkpoints?
Yeah, the whole package.
Sure.
Whole package, because I came on in '89, so it was a little bit looser back then as far as the DWI. I don't even remember DWI patrols back then until the early 90s, where it really kind of came on. So I'd say she's very influential as far as that's concerned.
I mean, they're pretty. I know we have them around here.
Yep.
The checkpoints actually started in Albany County, but the other counties quickly picked up on those. And they're funded through Stop DWI, which is fine money, as Mike said. And getting money back to that's the whole point of the program, getting it back to the community and back to the agencies that can use the funding. So it's a very unique program, unlike other government programs, because it's very dedicated to a particular cause.
Yeah. Now, is there a phone number associated with Stop DWI? Do you know?
Not directly. Each county has a coordinator. There's a very good website, which is just stopdwi.com, I believe it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm just wondering if anybody has a question today, they should probably contact the RID organization.
Well, Bill would know how to get hold of anybody.
If you want to just right now mention the phone number, because that's something that everybody has a phone.
518-372-0034. And our toll-free line is 888 283-5144.
Okay, and we can have that on the screen too,
yes,
so people can.
Going back to what Mike said.
Yeah.
One of the early programs that Doris began with those DWI patrols was a GATE program, and she called it Gather All the Evidence, because many times it would happen at the scene of a crash. You'd have the ambulance come and the fire department, and they'd wash down the scene. And so it was Doris who would put together little kits to go along with the DWI or the traffic safety officers, a little notepad, a camera, and just a way of recording the crash scene, because by the time the trial came, everything had been cleaned up. and accident reconstruction was very
Sure.
difficult. So that was a very important program that Doris began, and I believe it's very much in effect today.
Yes, it is. Today it's changed a lot in years from a technology standpoint. What I mean by that, there's cameras in the cars when we go up on a crime scene or an accident scene.
Yeah,
Versus a crime scene lots of
That's
times.
been a plus.
And,
for
oh yes,
sure.
yeah. What happens is it documents the scene is more of its original state, which
Yeah.
is very important. I do want to see over my years the paperwork with DWIs. We talked earlier about the plea bargains, not that they can no longer plea bargain out of an alcohol-related offense, but the paperwork. We, as law enforcement, when those changes made, we also had to make sure we dotted the I's and crossed the T's. And so this whole program evolved. It kept on evolving. It still evolves to this day, but it really kind of took off more. It seems like in the '90s, and kind of got us focused on policies and certain things that we have to do as law enforcement to checks and balances. And what you just mentioned is so true. To gather the evidence, so have a strong. It's really geared more for a stronger prosecution, so we can go in there and really kind of prosecute the case, and also hopefully that we can have such a strong case that it is a plea bargain, not to satisfy somebody's own personal defendant's calendar, but also so people such as yourself don't have to go through this whole trial basis. And I think it's from law enforcement, we look at it as present as strong case as we have to or we can, so it doesn't have to go to trial. And it's there's some benefit to that, both emotionally and publicly.
Yeah.
So
I just heard, this is somewhat relevant, that 1 out of 8 people are alcoholics in our country. And I'm just wondering how many of them drive, drunk. I don't know if any of you heard that statistic, but 1 out of 8, it was just announced. That's horrendous.
On a Friday night, Denise, 1 out of 10 drivers is impaired on a weekend evening. That's what the statistics seem to show.
yeah, I haven't read them in a while, so I can't confirm some of that. I will say this though, I do see the younger generation. You mentioned earlier 21. I'm not sure what happened on camera or off camera, but we talked about the 21 age drinking age going up. I know.
When did that go up to 21?
That had to be
1984.
Yeah,
1984, and it was 18 at that prior
went from
to that.
18 to 19 and then to 21, I believe, over the course of a couple of years.
Okay.
Kept on. I had a sister in college at the time, and she could drink for a couple months, and she couldn't drink for a couple because the kind of birthday fell in that rain. But I also see, and I don't have statistics to back this up. I'm just saying as a community, and especially I have a 23-year-old and 28-year-old, a lot more responsibility when it comes to that. A lot more, we have Uber down in the Capital District, which is new. But, they really kind of the designated driver type of rule. And I'm happy to say it. I don't have any stats to back this up, just being around a lot of colleges and college students in the past 5, 6, 7 years. And I do see more of a responsibility now than back in my era, and so that's a big
good.
plus. The awareness,
and it's all education.
Our numbers are still there, don't get me wrong, but I'm hoping that we're just getting better at it, and there's less people out there actually driving that way. So.
Well, that was another important program that Doris started. Was the recognition on college campuses of acute alcohol poisoning.
Well, she was really big on
and that's
getting
why
information out
a
on
lot
that.
of the funding wasn't available to Doris and the RID program is because she took such a strong stance against the alcohol industry, promoting the use of alcohol, especially by young people.
Yeah.
And more young people died from acute alcohol poisoning.
Yes.
And so just bringing that awareness.
It was
Right.
often hidden.
It was hidden,
It
right.
wouldn't list
brought
that
that
as
out
the
in the-
reason, and she was very, let's call it what it is and let's deal with the problem.
Exactly.
Right, and in the book it mentions that they use the terminology like cardiac arrest, asphyxiation, and not alcohol poisoning.
And so many times they would just take someone who was highly intoxicated and put them to bed, which is one of the worst things
you could do.
So I think she's,
Yes.
Doris was very
And they never, some
instrumental.
of them never woke up. We're going to take a break right now and show a clip on Doris's appearance on the Phil Donahue show in 1981.
Doris Aiken is president of Remove Intoxicated Drivers. You're from Schenectady. You have escaped the personal pain that these women feel but you were angered by a drunk driver incident in your own community.
I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee one Monday morning, and I picked up the paper. I saw the pictures of two teenagers, my own children's ages, 17 and 19, and they were killed outright by a drunk driver. And I waited to see what would happen to this person. If a murder is committed, the reporter will go out and give you the background of the murderer. You know where he went to school, how old he was, you know his previous record. Nothing happened. The offender's history sank into oblivion. And so I got 5 friends and $50 from my church to research how drunk driving cases were handled where I lived. And you know what I found out? I found out that the average drunk driver has had 15 drinks before he's arrested, not 2 beers on the way home from the bar. He's been driving for 3.5 years before he gets his first alcohol conviction. And he is a person we can get off the road. This is a licensed privileged activity. And I found out that nobody is taking the license away from these people, so they're going out and killing these people here. Drunk driving is the only one that we can do anything about. We can't stop cancer. And there is a great plot among the defense bar, if you please, and the judges at the local level. And there is not an adversary situation. The defense attorney comes in and asks for continuance, he gets it. There's no public in the court watching, and the defense bar earns the fees. I have to tell you that in this nation, the whole Veterans Hospital Administration will refuse to give a blood alcohol test when an officer requests it. And I'm asking President Reagan now if he's watching this program. I don't know if he watches. He is head of the armed forces, and he should issue a memorandum to all the Veterans Hospital. If a police officer asks for a blood alcohol test, you give it, or you're not going to get any public funds.
Very good. We're back, and quite an amazing clip.
Yes, this appearance on Donahue was what really exploded Ridge from a few counties in New York State to a nationwide organization. It was really based on that appearance that our chapters grew, and we were the biggest drunk driving organization for 2 years following that. And one of the things about my mother's spirit was she went to tape the show in Donahue, the clip from what you just saw, and then someone saw her on TV in St. Louis and called our house, and she said, well, she's at the hotel in Chicago. Just before cell phones or the internet or Facebook or anything like that. So the woman in St. Louis called my mother at the hotel, and then she said, you know, we want to get something started in St. Louis. She says, well, I'll take a train down, and I won't go. I'll cancel my flight and take a train down to St. Louis, and I'll meet you there. And that was just her kind of a freewheeling entrepreneurial spirit to get things going. And it really, people, when she passed away, wrote me letters saying about what an impact that had to have this dynamic person in front of meeting with the district attorney and having the media there and everything.
Yes. And
it's still to this day one of our strongest chapters.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And you have how many chapters?
Now,
right now
we have
currently?
35.
35 in how many states?
25.
25 states.
And Betty was talking about her involvement with binge drinking, and that was a big point of hers that didn't have quite the popular support that drunk driving did. You know, the binge drinking was a tougher issue for her to tackle, but she appeared on Maury Povich, and we got a whole new, from that appearance on Maury Povich, which I think we have a clip of.
Yes.
She gained a whole new set of activists and chapter heads through that.
Yes, well, we're going to show a clip right now from her appearance on the Maury Povich show. Mm-hmm. And that was in 1992.
Doris Aiken is founder and president of RID, Remove Intoxicated Drivers. Doris is also very active in educating the public about the dangers of teenage binge drinking. So what's the estimate about this?
Well, the essence is that there are 11 million junior high school and senior high school students in America, and half of those drink weekly and illegally, and 500,000 of those binge drink. That doesn't mean just getting drunk. That means you have 5 drinks at a sitting or more, or 15 drinks a week. That's binge drinking.
That's considered binge drinking. 5 drinks at a sitting?
Yes.
15 drinks a week.
Right.
Aha. Why do they say 5? Because that's when the alcohol content goes up in your body?
Yes, and it goes over the league of .10, at which a young person is severely impaired. So, and I want to say that I admired very much your setting out the number of drinks to show people what binge drinking is. But if you had had a beer can for every one of those shot glasses, the result would have been the same. There's just as much alcohol in a can of beer as there is in a shot and a half of whiskey or a glass of wine. People do not know that. So young people are now drinking wine coolers and beer. That is the cheapest beverage, the most highly advertised, without any warnings. And I want to say now,
so they're
Mark,
not dodging the problem by drinking wine coolers or beer?
No, because it's the same thing. It's alcohol.
Yeah. Yes.
What would you like to say about that appearance?
It almost never happened. They canceled when some of the advertisers found out she was appearing on the show. They pressured Maury Povich into saying he was going to cancel the show. So my mother, as with her indomitable spirit, said, okay, you cancel the show, we're going to have droves of our members protesting outside your studio. And with that threat allowed him to change, or forced him to change his mind. It's a very different time back then. I don't think that, today you could bully someone into re-inviting you to a show.
Yeah.
To back then, but she was just very shrewd and knew the right angle on how to
navigate that.
Dealing with somebody. I think most of us, if we were told, well, we're having a schedule changer, we're not going to do that issue, it's not in vogue, most of us are inclined to say, oh, gee, that really stinks.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah, but she ran into a lot of roadblocks, but she persisted through it all. Mm-hmm. And what I want to add is that many of the shows were sponsored by beer companies.
Alcohol, yeah. Well, this was probably,
that conflict.
This was the biggest dilemma for her, because she joined what was called the SMART campaign, which was Stop Marketing Alcohol on Radio and TV. Mm-hmm. Once the linkage with that, and she became known to the broadcasters, she was done. I mean, for many, the Maury Povich show was something that she was able to get through, because I don't know, maybe they hadn't got the memo that she was blacklisted.
Yeah, she was blacklisted.
But she never regretted that, even though I'm sure, RID it cost her millions, I would think, in terms of having, a brand that everybody would know, like people know MAD.
Yeah.
But she looked at it that she gained a lot of MAD chapters from, and people who looked at that and said, well, she is a woman of her integrity. She's not selling out to the alcohol industry by refusing to take money. It's still something that I am poor with. If I'm asking for a grant or for donations, I always stress that point, because that was her trademark.
Yeah, and I know from reading her book that there were former MAD members who came onto RID.
Yes, and for that reason, that was the main factor of, and that she ran RID very autonomously with the chapters. They pretty much, had a few guidelines to follow, but she never believed in micromanaging anybody, and that worked to her advantage.
Right. And of course, she was ethical, and that's so important. And now we're going to show a short clip of one of Doris's SAC shows that she did in 2000, and it was called The Opinion Show. And Lillian happens to be a guest on her show. So stay tuned for this.
Hello, everybody. This is The Opinion Show, and our panelists, of course, are not opinionated, but they have opinions. And the opinions are valid because we all live here, and we are doing the same things that you're doing on a hot day like today. we're cooling off. And we decided to cool off in the studio of SAC, Schenectady Community Access Program.
You're watching a tribute to Doris Aiken, and who has won many awards since she started RID back in 1978. Awards from former President Reagan, also Elizabeth Dole, who I believe was a Secretary of Transportation at the time, and in New York State from D'Amato. A very prestigious award she received in 1997 called the Juan Widmark Award. She was recognized in Paris for her work. So Doris did travel overseas as well to promote the cause. And I do want to mention her book again. This is My Life as a Pit Bull. And also the fact that there's going to be an event at Ellis Hospital on Monday, September 25th, a dedication ceremony of a plaque in honor of Doris. And I'm going to pass the mic to everyone. They can have some final closing words, and it's been such a pleasure to talk with all of you, meet you, and it's much appreciated what you've done today to affect our community, and hopefully we save many lives by getting more information out to our community.
Well, I want to say, as the person who's continuing Doris's legacy, filling her shoes is very daunting, but it's also very inspiring when I find that I'm having roadblocks or not getting through what I want. I use that as an inspiration to keep going and to persevere. So I think that it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I'm grateful to have someone who I can have as a role model and inspiration to move forward.
Well, I just want to say, having known Doris all these years in different capacities, mostly, although we did a lot of journeying here and there to attend different conferences and things like that, but my relationship with Doris was one of real intimacy. I always felt that of all my friends, she would be the one that was someone I could come to and talk to very, very intimately. And she always had a wonderfully different opinion. But also I want to say that I always felt completely welcome at the Aiken house, always invited for dinner, always very open and gracious. And she was a wonderful cook. When she would have people over for dinner, she would have the menu written on an easel, which I thought was so cute. But she was also wonderful as a host, so able, and so everything very gracious, truly gracious, not something made up. It just came with her. Those are among the many, many things that I can remember about Doris. Just a very welcoming, loving person.
A great hostess.
I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to work with Doris in the Stop DWI profession. I used to often go to meetings around the state, and I can't tell you how many times people would say to me, "Doesn't that woman drive you crazy?" And my answer would always be, yes, but we get things done. And I, again, could not thank her enough for being that person in my county and in New York State. And one comment that was made earlier, which to me shows that Doris, if she was still with us today, would be as relevant as ever, is in our discussion we had said she persisted. And if that's anything that describes Doris Aiken, is she persisted. I wish she was still with us.
Thank you, Denise.
When it comes to Doris, not to be repetitive, but as William said, these will be tough shoes to fill. And also, as Lily said, The dinner parties and parties at the Aiken household were always full of fun. Often conversations turned very political, and we had some fun clashes between all the people that were always there, like Frank and Jackie, Lily and Jane, William himself, and a few others. I don't know what else to say, but I miss her very much, and like I said before, I have a lot of work to do to sift through some old video clips of my own to dig up some stuff to keep Doris's memory alive.
Thank you, Jess.
As representing victims of DWI, I really need to stop and thank Doris, because she certainly had been the driving force in making some sense out of a senseless act, and to helping so many people all over the United States and abroad to finally have the courage to stand up and speak. And I mean, that's a gift that will keep on giving forever. And I know I particularly am very, very grateful for all Doris taught me, for all the adventures we were able to share, and for the work that was done. I will always see her at the Rose Garden and at the Albany Crime Victims Memorial and at the memorial in Rensselaer, with her board, with all the faces of the victims, because she's truly brought the face of the victim to DWI. And I think that's really has made all the difference.
Thank you so much, Betty. That's a gift that keeps on giving, for sure.
From a law enforcement perspective, we want to thank for inviting us to be part of this discussion, because I look at her as an individual that comes along very seldom and can motivate so many people, and also make such significant change. And the change we don't realize, just because it takes a long time to create, but she created that snowball that went downhill and became a big snowman. And she definitely had an impact on law enforcement in the sense of changing the cultures to some degree, and changing responsibility of personal responsibility, not only on the person that's driving while intoxicated, but responsibility on the officers to make sure they do a thorough job. So I want to thank the family for continuing on RID and being influential. So,
well, you have seen a lot of changes.
Yep. Yes. In
multiple in areas, the right direction.
Yep, exactly. And very seldom you see some changes, but individually driven. This
yes.
Especially after hearing more today. I mean, I knew her to some extent, but not like most of the panelists here. I knew her from a little bit different, and through the crimes victims, with Pat Joya and some of the other people there. But
yeah.
It's when you hear this and reflect back, and you realize how much influence she had on the changes.
Yeah.
I'm sure with the DA's office with Bob Carney, probably say it's the same type of thing, and the impact that she has. I just don't think people realize sometimes the individuals, like you just stated earlier, how she got you to stand up and be that person that you became by motivating you. And I think she had a lot of that. And she instilled that in a lot of people. I guess I hope I'm saying this right, but
yeah.
I think she came across as an individual, like the first night I rode with her. And my memories are more riding in the patrol car for a few times and the few hours that we spent together, and how my first impression was not my last impression.
Yeah.
And in the sense that I had this pre-notion that I was way off the mark, and it became. I think she had a great experience, and kind of brought a little bit more of a personal touch to what RID was into law enforcement. It was a partner of law enforcement. At the beginning, may not have seemed that way, but it turned out to be that way. So,
yes. Well, you're a credit to your department as well. I wanted to add that, especially in this political climate that we've all experienced. You're a breath of fresh air. Thank you.
Thank you.
I know Lillian would like to make another statement.
Well, if you have time.
Go ahead, Lillian. Sure.
I just wanted to say that I really am sure that the attitude toward drinking in the past 20 or 25 years was changed because of Doris. If you recall the kind of comedians we had 20 years ago, and how everybody laughed their heads off at the drunk drunken behavior. You do not see that anymore. Think about it. And Doris, in her own way, affected the rest of the world. I really and truly believe that she did. That was one thing, and all the other things that she did were very pervasive in her life and her legacy.
Well, she definitely changed the culture of drinking.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing, and we're still moving in that direction. I want to thank everyone again for participating today, and if it wasn't for our sponsors, Ellis Hospital, the Golub Corporation, DeCoco Associates, and the Goose Hill neighborhood, this show would not have been possible. So thank you, and thank all the guests and the audience for tuning in today. This has been a tribute to Doris Aiken and her legacy with RID.